Secretariat to share the slides if some people need them, so that at least you'll be able to refer to them just in case you join the meeting late. This presentation has therefore benefited from one of the chapters of this new book called Corruption and Economic Growth in Africa, The Impact on Development. And I think it is where I would try as much as I can to share these ideas. I start with an observation from one of our late compatriots, Kofi Annan. He said, corruption is an insidious plague that has a wide range of corrosive effects on societies. It undermines democracy and the rule of law, leads to violations of human rights, distorts markets, erodes the quality of life, and allows organized crime, terrorism, and other threats to human security to flourish. I think I would stand on Kofi Annan's observation and then give some definitions of corruption. Now, I'm going to give three major definitions of corruption in this presentation, starting with Transparency International, who sees corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. The United Nations sees corruption as an abuse of public power for private gain that hampers public interests. And they observe that this gain can be direct or indirect. And the final definition is by Robert Klickgard, who is an American academic. He says, he defines corruption as C equals to M plus B plus A. Now, minus A. Let me explain. He sees corruption C is the case where a person monopolizes M, public property, that he or she dispenses at his or her discretion, D, without any accountability. So C equals M plus D minus A. This is the definition I would reference throughout this presentation. Now, with that as our definition of corruption, let's look at the different types of corruption. The first is petty corruption, and this is carried out by low to middle income public officials that we meet, especially in your daily interactions with them. And in this case, even the police, when you meet them on the street. And I think if you look at petty corruption, these low to middle level officials have their own language. For example, in South Africa, if you are stopped by the police and they tell you something for cold drink, then you know they're looking for a bribe. In the Francophone countries, when they say "mouer la bouche," wet the mouth, so to speak, means they want something from you. In Nigeria, they go say, "What did you bring us?" You know, again, it's like that. Here in Ghana, the police might even say, your boys are on duty, which means that, you know, you must provide something. That is that aspect of the language they speak in those areas. Now, it is basically corruption that, you know, most ordinary citizens who interact with government agencies or officials for basic services have to pay something before they can get the service, or to get your file from one area to another is one of those things we realize. In the old days, you have to put the money in a driver's license. For most of the us who are much older, the driver's license used to be like a little book. So you put it inside and then they would probably let you go. Now, that is, in a nutshell, a definition of petty corruption. The next type of corruption that I would like to talk about is grand corruption. Now, I'll put it in blue in my slide because it is very important to African countries as well as developing countries. It takes place at the formulation level of politics and policies. This is the level at which policies and rules may unjustly be influenced to benefit a few at the expense of many. Now, it is very important because it has a very important impact on Africa's development. I will talk on that on the next slide. But let me then give the last type of corruption I want to talk about, which is systemic corruption. It is the case where individuals in the country have no option than to deal with corrupt officials in public sector organizations. That is systemic. I would say it becomes part of the DNA of that particular country in Africa or the society that we live in. So with this as a definition, let's then take grand corruption, which I talked about, which I see as one of the important factors that affect our development. Now, you will see public budgets that are earmarked to be built to build schools, hospitals, roads, bridges, and others are squirreled away by these corrupt public officials, in the lower to the middle level. But in this particular aspect also, grand corruption stands in the way of Africa's sustainable development. What do I mean by sustainable development? I'm talking about the development that keeps giving, the development that everybody within the society can benefit from, and others can come and build on. It truncates that. So you begin to see well holes develop into potholes develop into well holes. Roads are terrible. Hospitals have no medicine. Doctors have gone. And at the end of the day, the development retrogresses instead of progressing in most African countries. Grand corruption also distorts the efforts at attaining sound financial practices in Africa. We are all informed of how most public sector organizations' books are cooked. Invoices are missing. There's a lot of ways that people distort the resources that are supposed to be used to build stuff. I am informed of a story of two friends who went to school in the US. One is a Nigerian and one is from Asia. Many years back when they returned, the African went to visit his friend in Asia. And his Asian friend, he saw where he was living was plush. He had all the necessary amenities and the vehicles. And he was amazed. So he asked his Asian friend, but Mohammed, where did you get all this money to build this, palatial house and, living luxuriously? So his friend said, come over to the window. I want to show you something. And he pointed to the road over there and said, what road? You see that road that starts from here and ends there? It's supposed to end at the other side. The other side, from here to the other side, that is this house. That is all the luxury. So his African said, okay, fine. Then many years later, the Asian friend went to visit his Nigerian friend. And his house was even more palatial. And he couldn't believe it. So he asked his Nigerian friend, hey, Lamido, how come you are living like a king? And Lamido said, come to the window. And he said, have you seen that road? And he said, Asian friend didn't see any road. He said, which road? He said, exactly. That is the road. This house and all those things that are here are part of the road. That is grand corruption. That is what stands in the way of Africa's development. And in fact, there's a book by a British lady called Miss Wrong. She talked about, in her book about Kenya, where she wrote that the Kenyans, especially when they get into power, they were talking about it was their time to eat. So in Africa, pretty much, we see that when people get into power, they say it's their time to eat. I often wonder in Ghana, when somebody is being appointed as a minister and they have to go through vetting, you see either the chiefs, elders, all those people go to parliament. I don't know whether it is a way to get the parliament to approve these people or what. I mean, for me, I see differently that if that happens, at the end of the day, if this person becomes a minister, they would have to find ways, to do things for most of these people that come to them from their, from their village or wherever they come from. And I think that is one of the things that pushes grand corruption. So I also see that this grand corruption deepens poverty and leads to increased social exclusion. What do I mean by that? Well, if most people in societies do not have social networks to hold them when they are falling, then they will get into poverty. And if they are in poverty, they won't be able to sustain themselves. And it creates a lot of other challenges we will look at down the line. And I will give an example of where, if you look at South Africa, where I had worked before, um, the gap between the poor and the rich is very wide. And that tends to create a lot of challenges, especially when it has to do with security in South Africa. Of course, one would not disregard the impact of apartheid, but that poverty is what is causing a lot of challenges for the country. And of course, the United Nations, UNHCR, talks about the violation of human rights, the fundamental human rights of others, because of the fact that there is grand corruption. Now, let me move forward and look at the common forms of corruption. And of course, I'll just mention a few, but pretty much we all know about kickbacks, because with kickbacks, when the public sector ministry or whoever is in charge gives you a contract, you have to kick back something for them. And that actually affects the development, because what happens is at the end of the day, they give back so much that when they have to undertake, if it's a road, it is done flimsily, and it doesn't keep long before, what do you call it? It is destroyed. Bribery, favoritism, patronage. But one other one that I want to mention before I move on is called quiet corruption. Now, people will say, what is quiet corruption? I'm talking about that aspect of corruption where if you are a teacher or a lecturer, they pay you to lecture, and yet you don't come to class, or you don't actually do what you're supposed to do. Or if you're a doctor and you are given the opportunity, to take care of patients, and you are paid, and yet you don't do the work. Or contractors who are paid to do the work, and yet no work is undertaken. That for me is the definition of quiet corruption. Now, these are the forms of corruption. And of course, cronyism and nepotism, you know about that. But let me move on and talk about some of the causes of corruption. Bad governance. For us who are into governance, we know that bad governance is one of the causes of why corruption pertains. Now, it's sad because if you look at Ghana, for most of our public sector organizations, the boards, or if you look at what pertains, the chairperson of the board is appointed by government. The board members are also appointed by government. So where are the checks and balances? Obviously, at the end of the day, bad governance is going to pertain. Excessive greed has been something that causes a lot of corruption in Africa. I always tell people, how many balls of kenke can you eat? How many cars can you drive? How many houses or beds can you sleep in? But if you look at what happened recently in Nigeria, where there's the former petroleum minister, Alison Dizani, and she was the minister for 2010 to 2015. Now, according to EFCC, which is the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission of Nigeria, this lady acquired 56 properties in Nigeria, and these are not cheap properties, expensive properties. She has 5 upmarket properties in London, and properties up to about 144 million in the US, as well as including properties in Potomac. If you've lived in Washington, D.C., Potomac is a very expensive and plush area. I think if you look at such, that is excessive greed. And if you look at the poverty in Nigeria, in fact, according to Oxford, Nigeria has actually surpassed India as one of the countries with a lot of poor people in the country. And there are a lot of rich people. In fact, the largest number of jets in Africa is in Nigeria. So you begin to see that definitely is going to cause corruption. So those who are working in the public sector and they don't earn much, they have to find ways to be able to supplement their subsistence by taking bribes or by making sure that for them to push your paper or something up, you have to find something for them. Then, of course, one of the causes of corruption, according to my research, is political campaigns. They are becoming very expensive in Africa. And in this part of of Africa, Ghana, I mean, uh, actually now most of the elections are such that the winning goes to the highest payer who pays more. And I think it's an open secret. Everybody knows about that. And the people who pay for your campaign or support your campaign are not for the Christmases. They would need something back. So at the end of the day, definitely when you get into positions of power or responsibility, you have to pay back. And how much do you earn? So you have to find ways to be able to pay back all this money. So it creates a lot of corruption. Now, the existence of weak institutions and poor enforcement of laws are also one of the some of the causes of corruption. Most of our institutions are weak. They are weak in the sense that they don't even have the requisite resources that can enhance their work. I have seen in some situations where police officers don't even have vehicles to ferry them to where they have to go and inspect an issue. Or I've seen some institutions where when you go there, even paper for you to write is not there. So at the end of the day, what are you talking about? These people don't even have the resources, the requisite resources to help them to deliver on their mandate. Then you have poor enforcement of laws. I mean, most people, when they do something and they know they can get away with it, they will repeat it. You know, if you see most of the trotro drivers or matatu drivers, or if you go to South Africa, the taxis, they drive carelessly because they know when they are stopped by the police, they can give them something and get away with it. So the enforcement of the laws are weak. And with that, you don't expect for people to really obey the law. And I also say that the punishment is not really there. If they are really punished, then it becomes a deterrent, but it is not there. So at the end of the day, we're with what we have. The other one that I wanted to talk about is judicial corruption. And I think I can confidently say that the former Chief Justice Theodora Wood and the Judicial Council of Ghana had to, let go of some judges, about 20 judges that were alleged to be corrupt, as well as 19 judicial workers that were also alleged to be corrupt. That is what I'll just say for now. Of course, there are so many variations of that in different parts of Africa. And at the end of the day, the judiciary must there are a lot of hardworking judges and others on the judiciary that are working hard to make sure that laws are effectively enforced and justice prevails. But there are a few that has bastardized their work and makes it very hard for the judiciary to be able to perform. And the next one I want to talk about is poverty and illiteracy. Now, poverty creates corruption and corruption creates poverty. What do I mean by that? Well, poor people, like I said, do not make much. Their salary is very limited. And for them to be able to make ends meet, they have to do other means to make sure that they get extra money to, that they can be able to use to support them throughout the end of the month. And by doing that, they have to come up with red tape and bureaucracy or whatever it is to make sure that people have to give them those extra resources to be able to survive. But on the other hand, illiterates do not understand or do not know their rights. And in trying to access public services, they are made to pay for it. But this public service is supposedly those who are delivering the public service are paid. They are supposed to make sure that everything works, but they play on that illiteracy. So it is important that when we look at how to curb corruption, to talk about the educational aspect, which is very important. Then there is the lack of whistleblower protection laws. A few African countries have whistleblower protection laws, but are they effective? Because if you look at even Ghana, we have a whistleblower protection law, but is it effective? Because in most countries, when you blow the whistle, you might actually, be signing your death warrant. And it's different from the US, whereby they'll give you a different identity, give you different papers, move you out of where you are, and take care of you. And it is very important that we have whistleblower protection laws and really enforce them. But our culture also makes it very difficult because if you blow the whistle on some people in your community or in the country, they call you konkonsani, or tell they'll tell your case or konkonsani ba and stuff like that. That alone makes it very difficult for people who want to blow the whistle. But whistleblower protection laws are important because it makes sure that cases of corruption are reported, or if you see something within an organization you are working in, that you can report it, and that would bring about change. Now, I would now talk about the consequences of corruption. Political, economic, social, and national security consequences. Now the explanations follow. First, one of the political consequences of corruption is that if you look at systemic corruption, it can destabilize or undermine the legitimacy of governments in democracies. For example, if we move away from Africa and just talk about what is happening in Haiti today, it all starts with what was happening during the time of Papa Doc Duvalier to Baby Doc Duvalier, and so on and so forth. Once corruption becomes systemic, you can see the kind of destabilization it has brought the country. We can also talk about the Arab Spring, where it brought about Arab uprising, especially, if you look at Tunisia, where Mohamed Bouzizi was being harassed every day, by street level bureaucrats and police because he was auctioning, selling a few things here and there to make a living, and he had to immolate himself. And this led to the removal of the late Zain El Abidine Ben Ali, who was the head of the country. Then, of course, we can talk about Mexico, where criminals who through corruption has corrupted a lot of public officials, and it has increased insecurity. So that is one aspect of systemic corruption that can bring about insecurity and affect the legitimacy of governments in a democracy. Also, uncontrolled corruption can result in state institutions not being respected. I mean, it is sad that I have seen with my own eyes whereby police try to stop vehicles for undertaking, doing the wrong thing, and these vehicles, able to, the drivers just drive on. And then there is corruption that can destroy political parties and the ethos. And, because of time constraints, I'm not going to be able to explain deeply into that, but we can talk about those in this. The economic consequences are basically the increase in the level of poverty, growth in social spending is truncated. Corruption affects foreign investment because, in countries that you have a lot of corruption, people take their investment somewhere, or if they even invest, they're going to invest in short-term items. For example, portfolio investment, so that at the end of the day, they're not going to invest long-term. They just want to take advantage. And then donors might actually cut back or refuse grants and aids to other countries. And social consequences has to do with, poor service delivery, poor regard for public officials, and increase in crime. And I think it is very important to also say that crime becomes part of the DNA and accepted as normal in the society. Now, national security consequences has to do with law enforcement and national security establishment, whereby, corruption can affect the social order. And corruption also has an impact on information and documentation because criminals can pay public officials to get documentation. And I think one important thing I want to mention was recently where they were repatriating so-called Ghanaians from the US who had Ghanaian passports. Now, there was a tussle between the US government and Ghana, where Ghana, I think when they checked on these people, most of them were not Ghanaians. Now, for them, they made it in such a way that it will affect Ghanaian officials going to America. So definitely we had to receive them. But how did these people get Ghanaian passport? And of course, uprisings as we saw about the Arab Spring. And with that, we look at the impact of development. I have very limited time, but let me just go through some of them. You know, corruption is a tax on capital. And I think for all of us who know, investors would actually invest in speculative or short-term ventures or take their monies elsewhere. Now, corruption can cause war and instability. And we have seen that, and we even saw that instability during the time when Rawlings came to power was to fight corruption. And there are so many of those around Africa. It causes inequality, and corruption delays and distorts economic growth. Now, what are the suggested ways? And this is going to be the last part of my presentation. We need dedicated, consistent, and persistent political will. Just political will alone is not enough. You know, there must be that dedication to the fight of corruption. Corruption must be made expensive and inconvenient. As it is now, corruption is not made inconvenient. It is not made expensive. So people see it as a good way to get away with corrupt acts. Transparency, accountability, and good governance must be the environment we operate in. Using of the carrot and the stick, you know, yes, you must not only punish corrupt people, but you must also, you know, find ways to get them to be able to change or to contribute to the building of the continent. Our institutions are weak. They need to be enhanced. Enforcement of existing laws, strengthen supreme audit institutions and auditors general. And I think we had a situation here. I wouldn't talk much, but we all know about the situation of Domelevo. Now, of course, lifestyle audits, which is important, establishing of offices of special prosecutors, but I said make them independent, because our current Special Prosecutors Act is that it reports to the Attorney General. Now, I mean, that is a misnomer, you know, which means if the Attorney General doesn't like what the decision the special prosecutor is bringing, it can actually kill it. Cut bureaucratic tape, role of traditional rulers and cultures, role of religious leaders and organizations, role of a free, transparent media, role of bilateral and multilateral organizations, role of parliaments, values orientation and reorientation. And when I talk about values orientation and reorientation, I'm talking about the fact that our values that we have, our core values, are now, you know, swept under the carpet. When we were growing up, if your child came home with a car and you didn't know how he earned that car, you let them send it back. Today, they congratulate the child for being smart, so-called. And I'll end here by quoting Madiba. He said, our hope for the future depends also on our resolution as a nation in dealing with the scourge of corruption. Success will require an acceptance that in many respects, we are a sick society. Let's take out nation and put continent. Our hope for the future depends also on our resolution as a continent in dealing with the scourge of corruption. Success will require that an acceptance that in many respects, we are a sick continent. And I thank you very much, because time is limited. Let's interact, and if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Abdullahi. I mean, I told our audience in advance that we're going to have a very thought-provoking engagement tonight, and you have actually lived beyond that expectation. So thank you very much. Now it's time for questions, and I see a hand up, Michael Mriku. Yes, please go for it. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Um, Professor Abdullahi, um, I have a suggestion to make. So I saw on your last slide, you mentioned some suggested ways to fight corruption in Ghana. I think not much was dedicated to this very important part of your submission. I think we've gotten to a point where that part must actually take center stage, and academicians and um, um, learned people like yourselves must encourage or put us together so we address it in fuller detail. Now, why am I saying this? We know that we know the impact of corruption on our development. Yes, we do know. And the fact that a continent so much blessed with so much resources and yet littered with so much poverty, then there is it's what's the word? It's it's upside down. It doesn't make sense. So certainly, and as we've seen on literature on corruption, Ghana Integrity Initiative and other initiatives that have come up with even the cost of corruption. In fact, in Ghana alone, we know that the cost of corruption is about $3 billion. And you can even say, without any strain of doubt, that even this is a very charitable or very conservative estimate. So, like I said, I think we need an anchor on this. Maybe you need to do a part 2 of this, and so that we deliberate on how we can solve corruption. Because for me, the way I see corruption, the moment, for instance, you take a bribe, which is also corruption. You take money from somebody and the person doesn't do the job that he's supposed to do. I mean, you're giving the person a carte blanche to do whatever he wants. And certainly that is where the issue of I'm not against you taking, say, my concern is not the $1 million or the $200,000 that you took. I'm concerned about the 10 million that you gave away. The 10 million in the form of resources the person might have stolen or the work not done. That is where the issue is. So, Prof, like I'm saying, academicians and learned people like yourselves must come up with practical solutions to the issue of corruption, how we are going to solve corruption. All right. That is my take on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maxwell. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think what I just wanted to mention, I didn't want to bore, uh, colleagues with statistics. If you look at it just out of the African Union alone, Africa loses close to about 140 billion to corruption annually. So you can imagine what kind of development change it can bring if these monies were put into, So I agree with you. Hopefully, yes, we can look at a second part where we will do just what do you call it, solutions here. But this was just a little of those suggested solutions. There are many of them.
All right, I see the hand of Mr. Kofi Yeboah, and after that, I see the hand of Isaac Quay. So, Mr. Kofi Yeboah, please take it up, followed by Mr. Isaac Quay. Thank you. Mr. Kofi Yeboah, your mic is muted. Is it open now? It's Please speak up so we can hear you.
Okay, we thank Prof for a very wonderful delivery. That is so good. In fact, it's giving me a lot of insight. What I wanted to also comment is on kind of some imported corruption. In this country, we have a lot of turnkey projects that are going on. I happen to witness one. We asked the contractors coming from overseas to do the estimate. In fact, it was as twice. The same market project they wanted to do was much double. When a local person was doing the same thing, even with other functionalities, with more shopping outlets, the pricing was different. And these are some of the things that come from abroad. We don't know the inside because it's more than both executive and parliamentary are easy to, let's say, oh, let's carry on. And by the time we realize a lot of money is taken, the money that can do about 3 work is sink into one big project, and all the money is gone. And some of the money doesn't even stay in Ghana, it goes abroad. And there's a way that Africa has to come up in a way that we can solve this kind of imported corruption that has targeted Africa to rip it off a lot of things by providing infrastructure and then taking the development away from Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi. You are exactly right. And I think it is, if we want to develop and fight corruption, it's up to us. Yes.
Mr. Kwe, after that, I'll take a reading from the chat box.
Yes, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Prof. Very interesting discussions. I don't know whether I missed any point on our culture or less feeding for corruption. In many of our languages, it is said to wait that you don't go to a chief's palace empty-handed. Even now, within our communities, the most intelligent person will not even be listened to unless he's backing his words of advice with money. And so if we really want to fight corruption, then we need to look at our small community before looking at the bigger picture of the nation. Because if people have corruption as their DNA, we can propound all the theories we want to propound. We will never be able to take out from people what is their DNA. So we should look first at our small family settings. We look at our communities. And that is what translates in the political corruption we talk about. That is what translates into what we call petty bribe. But in actual fact, everybody, whether petty bribe, whether grand corruption, they are all bribery, and they should be condemned.
Okay.
Prof, if you can take a response, that'll be fine. Otherwise, we
Yes.
would...
Briefly, I would say yes. In fact, I did mention about the fact of whistleblowing, whereby in our society, part of our culture is if somebody does blow the whistle on someone in the community or whatever, they say, "Oh, you're concerning." So that in itself doesn't enhance our ability, to have people come forward and talk about, corrupt acts. So yes, I do agree with him. But that doesn't mean that we cannot fight corruption on both ends. We can fight within us, but also fight the greater aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I'll take a reading from the chat box. And this is from Mr. John Owusu Ntiamwa. It reads, "Thank you very much, Prof. Please, is there hope in our fight against corruption? since those who are supposed to lead the fight themselves are more corrupt than the citizenry. So that's the comment from Ms. Ntiamon. Well, would you like to comment on that?
Yes. I am an optimist. I always believe that it is the optimist that invented the aeroplane, and the pessimist invented the parachute. I believe that these two shall pass. I think at this particular point, we would, though we have these challenges, if we really rededicate ourselves and make sure that our institutions and our policies work, it will play a very good role in at least curbing corruption. We can never totally eliminate corruption in anywhere in the world, but we can curb it. That will help in our enhancement and our development.
Oh boy. All right. Thank you, Prof. I think we'll take the last question, after which I would invite Madam President to give her closing remarks. Any more questions? I don't see anything in the chat box. Is there a new message? Okay, so there's a new message from Lisa Maxwell and Pierre Queening. It reads, how can a director being appointed by political leaders stay away from corruption when the leaders are demanding from him? Should I repeat? How can a director being appointed by political leaders stay away from corruption when the leaders are demanding from him?
Madam Chair, can I come in here? Hello?
Yes, Prof, please do.
I think for me, one of the most important things is for us to revisit our constitution, because it is actually in the constitution that mandates that the president of whichever party comes into power appoints these people. And I think that's where the problem is. At the end of the day, Professor Lumumba once said that you cannot appoint hyenas to look after your chickens and expect them to, to survive. I think at the end of the day, we need to look at that. That's what I said. Our policies and most of our documents that, builds us as a nation needs to look at that. It is hard to do that. It is very, very hard, because there will be no checks and balances. And if you look at it clearly, any party who comes into power in Ghana, and we are talking about Ghana now, has to kowtow to what the party or the politicians or the leaders in their party talks about. And they choose those people, to be on some of these boards as a job for the boys. It is not based on the fact that people have specific skills they are going to contribute. In most cases, it is not. So I do agree with what the colleague has submitted. Yes.
Thank you, Prof. And I might add that it's the same thing. You cannot invite the cat to watch over your meat. Thank you. So I'll read the last one, and after that, I believe our president will come in for a closing remark. So this is from Edwin Kwabena Ajay. It says, thanks, Prof. It is said corruption started from Adam. How can will mitigate corruption in our system? How can will mitigate corruption in our system?
Madam, I would say it's not just will. Like I said, it has to be consistent and persistent. If it is just a will, it is just nebulous. If our leadership and we as Ghanaians want to fight corruption, or Africans want to fight corruption, the various leaders must have the political will, but this political will must be consistent, persistent, and actually enduring, because corruption is not going to go away without a fight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there was yet another one. I don't know if Madam President, it's okay to take this last one.
Please go ahead.
That. Yeah. So it's a comment in the chat box. It says, "Thanks, Prof, for your presentation. My question is, it seems Africa is relaxing on the fight against corruption. What do you think about this? Thanks."
Yes, I do agree. And I think that is why I wrote this book. It took me 4 years to do the research and write the book. I'm passionate about the fact that I have traveled and live around the world, and I keep on traveling. And I don't see that those countries are any more intelligent or more, hardworking than us. I think what we bring to the table is the fact that the resources that we have, the little that we have not been able to snowball it or invest into things that would enhance us. And I think at the end of the day, we start always looking for the grass. We think it's greener on the other side, but the grass is only greener when you water it on your lawn or wherever you find it. That's the only way you can get it. So we like to live in Europe, we like to live in America, but it's because their systems as well as their governments do not tolerate corruption. They will fight it. So I think, yes, it is important for us to do that, but then it's up to us, frankly. No one is going to help us than us. Other people would, empathize with us, but at the end of the day, no one likes that more than we like ourselves. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. We have to come to the table and fight it. It's not going to be easy. I've never said that, and I would never say it's easy. It's hard. I remember, the former president of the United States, John Kennedy. Kennedy, at the time where the Soviets sent a man to space, they told themselves that they're going to send a man to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. If we are going to develop, it's not going to be easy. We have to fight corruption. There are other fights, but corruption is the most important one, because once you don't have the resources, then we have to go to the IMF and others, and they dictate to us. And at the end of the day, you are not actually coming up with the resources to fund your own local development or local things that you want to develop. You have to do things based upon what, who pays the piper chooses the tune. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. So it's not me. A conversation was that we are likely to ask you for round 2. So here is what somebody is saying on the chat box. Thank you, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. I think we would have part 2 of your presentation that would deal with the statistical aspects. Those figures will point out how endemic corruption is derailing our progress as a country. And I think that in addition to the request for solutions, Prof, we don't want to put you on the spot, but your audience do want to hear you again. So that will be the last comment I'll read. And thank you again. And I invite Madam President, Reverend Mrs. Angela Carmen Appiah, the chair of the 10 Governing Council, to now give us her closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Asare-Yeboah, and Chair of the Interim Management Committee. Thank you very much, Professor Abdullahi. Indeed, this is just what this roundtable seeks to do. Provide us with the right nudges and to get us thinking critically, not just as individuals, but as professionals. So, as we put ourselves on the scales, how do we find ourselves? It's not just about pointing to others or pointing the way for others to go, which are the ways in which we ourselves are going. And we should be mindful of the fact that as professionals, we have professional ethics to guide our conduct. How familiar are we with our ethics? Are we on the right course? Have we departed or deviated? For some, have we aborted the course? And if we have done anything apart from being on the path, what kind of moral fabric do we have? I would like to say a big thank you to you, Prof, for bringing this kind of meal for us to taste. For some, it may not taste too good. It may be too well seasoned, spiced. It may be too hot. It may be too cold. It may be too hot. But whatever it is, I believe the question is to do with our taste buds. So what kind of taste buds do we have? I'd like to also add that as we call for a round two, it isn't so much us getting the statistics, but doing our reflections towards ethical conduct. We do know how we are faring as professionals, all our actions and inactions, the professional acts of misconducts. How do we assess ourselves? Do we only shout when it is going against us? Or do we shout foul because it is indeed foul? Do we keep quiet just because it is favoring us? Or we keep quiet because we are dancing to the piper's tune? Let us be mindful. We live in an ecosystem whose borders are increasingly becoming borderless. There are giants in the ecosystem, and we have sustainability issues. How sustainable are our actions? Let's also be mindful that it is said that when the last tree dies, the last man dies. On this note, Madam Chair, I'd like to say a big thank you for a program well organized. We will be looking forward to a part two. God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you, and enjoy your evening, everyone. Thank you again, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good evening and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.